In this lesson, we're going to talk about compression. Compression is an indispensable tool that's found across individual tracks, mix buses, and mastering chains. One of the most popular effects that we use so often is compression. It's used for taming dynamics, manipulating amplitude envelopes, peak limiting, sidechaining, parallel processing, and a lot more. Yet despite its popularity, it can be quite enigmatic for novices and veterans. It can be kind of a strange, confusing thing, since differences in dynamic range are often harder to discern when compared to other sonic properties like pitch and tempo. So what is compression? Let's talk about it. Compression reduces the overall dynamic range of a piece of audio by detecting when it exceeds a specified level and then attenuating it by a specified amount. Put simply, it narrows the difference between the loudest and softest parts of a track so that it's more consistent in level. If you've ever turned things up and down when something is too loud or something is too quiet, this is kind of similar. If you've ever drawn automation curves for a track's level, you've likely unknowingly done some manual compression. You probably brought down parts that were excessively too loud, downward compression, and brought up parts that were too soft, upward compression. Though it's generally less customizable because Compressor automates this process for us, which can 1, save us a lot of time, and 2, introduce sonic characteristics and use cases that are unique to compression. Though there's always exceptions, most compressors share a common set of parameters, and understanding what each one does will allow us to use compression in our music with more intentionality and ease. So the first parameter we're going to talk about is threshold. A compressor's threshold, expressed in decibels, dB, determines the level at which the compressor starts compressing. The threshold can be set strategically to target specific moments in your audio. For example, if a drum groove snare is too loud, you can set the threshold so that it's low enough that the snare exceeds it, but high enough that the rest of the kit is bypassed. The best way to do this is to slowly raise or lower the threshold until the meter only reacts to the snare. So this is one part of the process I'm going to do visually. The rest I'm going to use my ears. So I'm going to bring down this threshold, and you're going to see that it starts compressing.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lottery. Keep it up.
So as you can see here, we can see some attenuation happening, and it's being reduced. Now let's talk about the ratio. Once the compressor has detected that the input signal has exceeded the threshold, it starts attenuating the signal. The amount the level is reduced is determined by the ratio. As an example, if the threshold is set to minus 20 dB, the input signal hits minus 16 dB and the ratio is set 2 to 1, the output signal will be attenuated to minus 18 dB. Because the input surpassed the threshold by 4 dB, the 2 to 1 ratio cuts this value in half, resulting in the output of negative 18 dB. So I often don't pay attention to the math, but it's good to have an understanding of it. All you need to know is make sure that your ratio is set greater than 1, otherwise it will not compress at all, as you can see.
Listen, my philosophy.
As soon as we crank up the ratio by a little,
Listen, my philosophy.
you can see we have a little bit of compression. For me, the magic number as far as compression goes is a 3 to 1 ratio. That's the number I often use the most. There's not really any specific reasons for this, but it's generally just a safe number to use, and you see it in audio a lot. The number 3 or 6 or 9. For whatever reason, generally a ratio of 3 is just where I leave my compression, and I go from there. All right, now let's talk about the attack of a compressor. The attack of a compressor, typically measured in milliseconds, ms, determines how quickly it pulls the input signal down to the full ratio value when it exceeds the threshold. Now let's talk about the release. The release is the opposite, representing the total time it takes for the signal to return to an uncompressed state. So what's important to note is if you make your attack time very fast, it's going to squish the signal and kind of make it mush. With a fast attack speed, the compressor kicks in almost immediately, which is great if you're trying to prevent signals from clipping or tame unruly peaks. As for tone, fast attack times can be used to tighten up sloppy performances and make things feel a little bit more polished. Setting the attack time too fast may suck the life out of a performance, or push an instrument back in the mix, making it sound farther away from the listener. Fast attack speeds can also cause audible distortion or artifacts, especially when dealing with bass frequencies. To prevent this, try using a compressor with a built-in high-pass filter to bypass the bass frequencies. With a slow attack speed, the compressor lets a bit of the initial signal through before it kicks in, which can be used to emphasize the impact of a signal, making it sound bigger and more aggressive. However, slow attack speeds are not ideal for controlling dynamics. In fact, slow attack speeds can actually make a performance with uneven dynamics even worse. Now let's talk about release. Fast release times are great for increasing the perceived loudness of a track. At low levels of gain reduction, fast release speeds sound the most natural. However, when used at high ratios, fast release times can make tracks sound more gritty and aggressive. Just be careful, extreme compression with a fast release time can cause an unwanted pumping sound. Slow release speeds are great for smoothing out dynamic performances. It can also be used to push an instrument back in the mix, making it sound farther away from the listener. If the release time is too slow, a compressor may suck the life out of your performance, making it sound dull and flat. Now, when discussing specific settings, this isn't really helpful because settings that sounded good for one instrument may not sound good for another. That's why, in almost all cases, engineers simply refer to attack and release as fast and slow or medium. Generally speaking, faster attack and release times will give you more aggression, grit, and loudness, while slower times sound smoother. Many engineers choose to begin applying compression with a slow attack speed and a fast release speed for the most natural, transparent sound. These settings will help ensure that the dynamics of performance are preserved while still taming the loudest transients. So to start, adjust the attack time as needed. Use a slower attack speed to preserve the transient and a faster attack speed for more control. Then adjust the release settings so that it breathes in time with the performance. To do this, simply watch the gain reduction meter and adjust the release time so that the signal just barely returns to zero before the next transient. This helps give each of the tracks a more cohesive sound, like they're all working in time together. So to sum up for attack and release, you just need to use your ears and find the settings that work best for your sound.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of breed. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get it.
So you can see when I had the attack at the fastest setting, we were getting compression. But when I set it all the way to the slowest setting, we were almost getting no compression at all. So a good place to start would definitely be a faster attack time, but not too fast because I don't want to smush my vocal.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of breed. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him in there.
That feels good right there. Now let's try to make the release as fast as possible without it sounding pumping or distorted, and then I'll adjust from there.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of breed. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him in there, ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why do people watching me? Why they wanna...
That feels good to me right there, so we're gonna leave it there. All right, now let's talk about the knee. The knee determines the character of the gain reduction that's applied to a signal. It ranges typically from a value from 0 to 1, with 0 being a hard knee and 1 being a softer knee. A hard knee begins reducing gain abruptly when the compressor exceeds the threshold, whereas a soft knee introduces gain reduction gradually as the signal approaches the threshold. A compressor's knee is more nuanced in its impact than attack and release times, but can be valuable nonetheless. In general, try leaning towards fast attack and release times with a hard knee for more noticeable aggressive compression, and slow attack and release times with a soft knee for subtle, gentle compression. So as you can see right here, if we look closely at this curve, you can see all the way at 0, we have a hard knee. You can see it's quite a sharp curve right there. And then if we move this over all the way to the right, we have a nice gradual curve here. So this will slightly change the flavor of your compression. All right, now let's talk about makeup gain. We often associate compression with making a track louder. However, we've learned that by definition, compression actually reduces level. Makeup gain is what allows compression to make a track louder. We can compensate the level that we lost using this parameter. And because we tame the peaks, we can actually make the overall audio louder without running into clipping. So as you can see by how much I'm compressing here, we can add that back with our gain.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of breed. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him in there, ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why do people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be?
So why this is so powerful is by turning up the gain, you're turning up the quieter parts of your signal, and then by compressing, you're taming the louder parts of your signal, bringing the quiet and loudest parts closer together, thus creating a more evenly dynamic signal, which is usually easier to mix with and control in a song. So compression has many uses even beyond just taming the dynamic range of a signal. It can also change the envelope of a sound, giving more sustain to a guitar, or it can be used for sound design to make things pump or sound more aggressive. There's many uses to compression, but let's continue the tutorial. So if we take a look at this audio here, this vocal performance, you can see that some parts are quieter and some parts are louder. And this kind of gives the feeling that the singer is less confident, even though that's not true at all. When we even out the dynamics and make the quieter parts more loud and the louder parts more quiet, it adds this confidence to the vocal performance and really helps the vocals cut through properly. So let's hear the vocal completely raw.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of breed.
It started out too quiet, and then the next passage it got really loud. So now let's turn on the compression and hear the difference.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of breed.
You can see it's a bit more even now. Now let's commit this and we can actually see the difference in the waveforms. And now if we compare the two performances, you can see that in the second committed track here that printed the compression, the performance is much more even. The quieter parts are louder and the louder parts are quieter, yielding a much more even and confident performance. Now let's go over all the different types of compressors. All right, the first one we're going to be looking at is a VCA compressor. VCA stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier. These types of compressors use a control signal to determine whether gain reduction is applied to the signal. VCAs are one of the most common types of compressors and usually contain all the parameters you find on plugins: attack, release, threshold, ratio, knee, etc. Engineers love VCA compressors for their precise control and predictable sound. They're thought to be reliable, and the style of compression they offer is repeatable based on the precision of the parameters. VCA compressors are especially at home on groups of instruments and buses. For example, the SSL-G bus compressor is one of the most famous examples of VCA compression, perfect for adding semi-transparent glue across an entire mix. Another popular hardware unit is the punchy API 2500 compressor, which many engineers love on drums or the mix bus. Let's dial in this SSL compressor.
No apology, gotta go and get him, and there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me. Trying to get some property, then give me a monopoly. Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese, like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no. Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese, like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him, and there ain't nobody stopping me.
That sounds great. Now let's talk about FET compressors. FET stands for Field Effect Transistor. As their name suggests, FET compressors rely on transistors for gain reduction. These compressors are incredibly fast. Attack and release times can be set to just about instantaneous. With that lightning speed, they tend to introduce a bit of distortion and lovely color to the signal, especially when you're pushing them aggressively. That means they're not as great as a clean VCA compressor on a mix bus, but on individual instruments, they're amazing. FET compressors are fantastic on vocals, guitars, kick drum, snare, and more. The most popular FET compressor of all time is the 1176 limiting amplifier, which was originally released in the late 1960s. It's known for adding a very desirable character to any signal, which is often described as bright, present, and gritty when pushed. The famed all-in buttons mode, literally pushing all the ratio buttons, practically turns the device into a saturation box. Really awesome for super aggressive parallel compression. The 1176 has spawned dozens of hardware imitations, and of course you'll find emulations in the plugin domain as well. So this is the CLA 76. It has the blue version and the black version. The blue is a little bit more aggressive and vintage sounding, so I like using this for music. Let's try this out. So you're going to notice that with this, you don't have a threshold. It's going to be set by the input and output, so how much you feed it. The attack and release can also be confusing as well. All the way to the left is actually the slowest setting, while all the way to the right is the fastest setting. Here's the different ratios, and you can see if you go all buttons in here, it's going to be much more aggressive. So let's dial this in.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese, like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him, and there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me, trying to get some property. Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese, like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him, and there ain't nobody stopping me. Like.
So you can see it really makes the vocals pop forward. So this is an absolutely amazing compressor, and I love using it. All right, the next type of compressors we're going to talk about is optical compressors. Optical compressors, or opto for short, use a light-dependent resistor and a light source to determine how compression gain reduction is applied. The input signal literally turns on a light source inside the compressor that will shine brighter or dimmer depending on the input level. The light-sensitive resistor then causes the compressor to apply gain reduction. When the light dims in response to the fading input signal, the amount of compression is reduced. Optical compressors usually sound musical and smooth. They're not as fast and aggressive as FET compressors, nor are they as clean and punchy as VCAs. Optos have their own thing going on. A widely used vocal chain, for example, starts with a FET compressor to catch the sharpest transients and ends with an opto compressor to glue everything together. I use this all the time. The most famous example of an optical compressor is the Teletronics LA2A. The only controls it has are a gain knob and a peak reduction knob. Attack and release times are not controllable because they're program dependent. Hot input signal keeps the light source illuminated, so the release time will be longer. The opposite is true for weaker input signals. So let's dial this in.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese, like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology, gotta go and get him, and there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me, trying to get some property, then give me a monopoly.
So you can hear that really smooths out the vocals. I absolutely love opto compressors on vocals and bass. They're amazing. All right, now let's talk about tube compressors. These types of audio compressors make use of vacuum tubes for dynamic control. Some compressors like the LA2A use tubes to add a bit of color to the signal, but not to apply the gain reduction. Tube compressors use tubes to apply gain reduction. These types of compressors tend to have a slower response to transients relative to other types of compressors, making them a good choice for instrument or mix buses. They won't suck the life out of your mix because their slower attack times keeps important transients intact. The best known example of a hardware tube compressor is the legendary Fairchild 670, which has been discontinued for a very long time and is incredibly expensive to own one. So let's try using this compressor.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me?
That sounds so incredibly good. The Fairchild 660 by Waves is one of my favorite, and I do use this compressor a lot. It has a very smooth sound to it, but with a little bit of aggression that I really like. All right, let's talk about one last type of compressor. PWM compressors. PWM stands for pulse width modulation. These types of audio compressors are the most overlooked, though they can be just as powerful as any of the other listed. PWM compressors use high-frequency pulse signals to trigger on and off values, and thus control the average amplitude of a signal over time. It essentially splits the signal into discrete parts and then mutes certain sections. Pulse width modulation uses an incredibly fast pulse rate, well into the hundreds of thousands of cycles per second. This allows the compressor to control average level without introducing artifacts or an audible on-off stutter sort of effect. PWM compressors are known for being transparent and having lightning-quick attack and release times. The most iconic PWM is a legendary Pi compressor from the 60s. This one here is the Kramer Pi compressor from Waves, also one of my favorite compressors.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be?
That just sounded so incredibly smooth, and I love using this compression, especially on vocals. Understanding these different types of compressors can help you make informed decisions on what to use where. They each have fundamentally different sonic characteristics based on the technology inside, making them work. Plugins emulate styles of compression as well as individual hardware units, so you can make use of all the types of audio compressors in your mixes. Now let's talk about multiband compression. Multiband compression is a more advanced form of compression. A multiband compressor splits the frequency spectrum into separate bands. Each frequency band also has dedicated compression settings. Applying different amounts of compression to the separate frequency ranges gives you more control. A multiband compressor is essentially an EQ and a compressor in one. Why use multiband compression? Multiband compression is more flexible than standard single band compression. The results sound more natural and transparent. You also have greater control over shaping and managing dynamics. For instance, standard compressors affect the entire frequency spectrum of an audio signal, whereas multiband compressors enable you to treat specific frequency ranges of an audio signal. For example, you can compress the low frequencies while preserving the high frequencies or vice versa. Another example, say the top end of your snare is too harsh, but standard compression causes it to lose punch. For this reason, multiband compression will work better. You can compress the high frequency band more than the mid and low bands. In turn, the top end will sound less harsh and dynamic. You'll also preserve the snare's punch because the mid and low bands will have less compression. It's kind of the ultimate sculpting technique for your audio. The benefits of multiband compression are endless. There's a reason top producers and audio engineers use multiband compression to get the sound they want. So let's dive in. This is the Wave C4 multiband compressor, one of my favorites. So as you can see, we have different crossover points to split up the frequency bands. Then we have solo and bypass, and then all our standard compression controls. Our threshold, our gain, the range is how much we want to reduce or add. We can actually compress upward, and then our attack and release settings. So let's try first compressing the low end of this vocal.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, G. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me. Trying to get some property to give me a monopoly. Like.
So this is gonna keep the low end of the vocal in check. But what makes a multiband compressor so amazing is that we can use it much like we use EQ, where I can boost this frequency range or attenuate it.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology.
So this makes them incredibly powerful. Let's continue on. Now let's tame from 250 Hz to 1000 Hz, kind of that mid-range area.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me.
All right, now let's continue in the higher bands. The next one I'm going to focus from 1,000 to 8,000.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology.
So what's amazing about multiband compressors is that I can tame that region, but also boost it and add more presence at the same time while keeping it controlled. So incredibly useful. Now let's do the last band in the high end.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me?
Then you can see I have master controls here that'll move everything. The release here, ARC, stands for auto release control, or I can set it to the manual settings. I like the ARC though. And then we just have two behaviors here, electro and opto. Electro tends to be more modern and hi-fi. Opto is a bit smoother, so let's put it on opto, and then we have our knee setting.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be?
So you can hear that really changes the tone of the vocal. Do remember, vocals are very dynamic and all over the place, so a multiband compressor is an amazing tool to lock your vocals into place. I use multiband compression on vocals very, very often. Now let's talk about serial compression, where instead of using one compressor to do the job, we use two and feed one into the other. Let's visit that technique we highlighted earlier. First, I'm going to add a FFET Compressor 1176, and I'm just going to use it to tame some peaks very lightly.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me?
So you can see I'm just tapping that just to tame some peaks. Then I'm going to feed that into an opto compressor.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like,
you can hear with this technique of serial compression, we're getting a smoother result using two compressors instead of putting the workload on just one. I use this technique all the time on vocals, and I recommend you try this too. Let's hear it off.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Like,
the vocals sound so much smoother with that on. So serial compression is an amazing technique. Now let's talk about a DSER. A DSER is a type of audio compressor that applies gain reduction to sibilants and other high-frequency issues in a vocal track. Sibilances are high-frequency sounds created by the human voice when pronouncing the letters S, F, S, Sh, Ch, and all that sound. But you can find these harsh high frequencies in other instruments as well, like crash cymbals and electric guitar. Sibilants and harsh frequencies typically happen anywhere between 4 and 10 kHz depending on the vocal and instrument. A DSER operates by targeting and attenuating frequencies associated with sibilant sounds in vocal recordings. Your basic DSER is a compressor that responds to these aggressive frequencies, turning down the vocal whenever it detects harsh, piercing sibilants. All DSERs rely on a similar tactic, a circuit that detects an excessive level of sibilants, typically in the range of 4 to 10 kHz, and a processor to clamp down on these frequencies in a musical manner. The goal is to maintain a natural and intelligible vocal quality while mitigating the harshness. Parameters such as threshold, attack, and release settings allow users to fine-tune a DSER's response to match the characteristics of different vocal performances, providing a pragmatic solution for controlling sibilants in audio production. Now, obviously, we can do manual de-essing, which we turn it down by hand, but this is a lot of work, and I prefer to use plugins for this. So let's use the RDSer by Waves. First, let's talk about wideband de-essing. Wideband de-essing is essentially the plugin version of manual de-essing. The plugin identifies the sibilants and brings the whole entire signal down.
listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go.
Now, I typically don't use wideband, but this can be very useful for like whispery type tracks where the whisper is much louder than the audio, so you might need wideband, but play around until you find the settings you like. Many DSers have a split band mode, which reduces sibilants above a selected frequency, leaving the rest of the signal intact. They're almost like multiband compressors, except there's only one band of compression occurring above a set frequency target.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie. Keep it up, no.
So this is often the mode I use the most. They're very, very easy to use plugins. Set the threshold for gain reduction, make sure it's hitting the audio, and the range is just how much you want to reduce it by. Then here's the frequency range. We can also change it to narrow mode, which is very useful as well.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lot of brie.
And you can go all the way down to 2000 with this. So if you want to reduce some harshness, even though it's not necessarily sibilance, this is a great technique.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lottery.
So you can see, de-essers are very versatile.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like
Now, one thing I have to warn you about de-essers, you got to be very careful not to overdo it, or you might give your singer a lisp. So be very careful how much you do this by. You want to do it just the right amount and only have it focus on the harsh sibilant frequencies.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lottery.
Now, you may not always need to de-ess, but do keep in mind with all the processing you're going to be adding, especially making vocals brighter and brighter, it's a very good idea to de-ess your vocals. I will often use 2 de-essers on one vocal just to get the sound I'm looking for. Now, we're going to leave this de-esser before the compression. I typically like to de-ess before my compression, and as well as EQ before compression. Sometimes it's good to cut out frequencies that you don't want to feed to the compressor because it might be reacting to those frequencies when you don't want it to. There's really no right or wrong to this though. It all depends on the situation. So some will EQ before compression, some will EQ after compression, some will EQ before compression and after compression, or some will compress before the EQ. It just all depends on what works for you. Now let's talk quickly about limiters. We'll go way more in depth about limiters when we get to mastering, but it can be used for mixing as well. Both limiters and compressors are tools that reduce the dynamic range of an audio signal. Given the right setting, a compressor could even act as a limiter. Since limiting is meant to act as a shield against all peaks, it makes use of an infinite ratio. The ratio setting determines how hard you're squashing the parts of a sound that exceed the threshold. A ratio of 8:1 would mean that a signal of 8 dB over the threshold level would be compressed until there's only 1 dB left that exceeds that level. Alternatively, a ratio of 20:1 would mean that a signal of 20 dB over the threshold would be reduced to 1 dB over threshold, which boils down to 19 dB of gain reduction. Note that compressing audio with a ratio of 10:1 or higher is generally considered limiting. In the case of a limiter's infinite ratio, this would mean that the sound will be compressed so hard that not even a single peak is allowed to go past the threshold, no matter how small or short those peaks may be. So we often hear the term brick wall limiters, where that brick wall, nothing's going past it. So you can see on this limiter, we have the release time. Do note that when you bring the threshold down, you're also adding that gain back as well. This is how we make things loud, but we're going to go over that in mastering. So for mixing, all I want to do is shave off some unruly peaks here and there. So I'm going to bring down the output ceiling, which is the maximum output ceiling you're allowing your audio to not go past. So I'm going to bring these down linked together so I'm not adding loudness. Because as you can hear, if I bring this threshold down,
listen, my philosophy,
it gets much louder, which I don't want right now.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man, there ain't nobody stopping me.
So as you can see, I'm only reducing the peak every so often, just when it gets a little bit too unruly. If you overdo this, you can ruin your vocal.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot.
And we definitely don't want that.
Listen, my philosophy, get a lot of cheese like I want a lottery. Keep it up, no apology.
Not every style of music will require this, but for pop and hip hop and aggressive vocals, I love to add a limiter on my vocals just to make sure it's kept in check. All right, now let's talk about some more advanced concepts. Let's first talk about sidechain compression or ducking. Sidechain compression is when the level of one instrument or sound triggers a compressor to control the level of another. One common use of sidechain compression is in electronic dance music. A compressor is placed on the bass, so when there's a kick drum hit, the bass level drops to create room for the kick. In simple terms, you can think of the sidechain as the compressor's boss. The sidechain is an aspect of the compressor that tells it how to react to the signal. The term sidechain is a shortening of the phrase side signal chain. Side here means different from the main input source, i.e. whatever you slap the compressor on. Signal chain refers to the gear that processes an audio signal, such as an equalizer. Now let's talk about sidechain ducking. If you look at this plugin here, we have this little key right here. This is our sidechain input, which allows us to feed our compressor any signal we want. Meaning that instead of compressing the audio on the track, it can actually listen to something else and compress that instead while still being on the track. So a simple way to explain this is the grocery store. If you remember when you're walking in a grocery store and you hear the music on the system, sometimes you hear an announcer come on and then the music gets really quiet and the voice ducks the music so you can hear it. This is almost exactly the same as sidechain ducking here. This can be used to make room for elements in your mix. It can be used for EDM to make this cool pumping sound. There's many, many uses for this. One of my favorite uses is to make room for the vocal on top of your instrumental. So the way we're going to do this, on our vocal channel, we're going to pick an unused bus. I'm going to right click and rename this vocal duck. I'm going to option click on the send here so it's sent out. And now on the sidechain input of my compressor, I'm going to feed it with that bus I just created. Now if I bring the threshold down, the vocal is what is going to be triggering this compressor. Though keep in mind this compressor is on the music, meaning that when the vocal is active, the instrumental is going to be ducked.
This is my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no.
And as you can see, when the vocal stops,
Some property to give me a monopoly.
the compressor stops as well. So this is such an incredibly powerful technique for so many uses. Now, something to keep in mind is that you're ducking the whole entire mix. Now, this is not the most efficient way to do this. You can do a very light amount and maybe it will work, but remember, there's frequencies in this music all the way down to 60 hertz and lower, and that's not going to be clashing with the vocals necessarily. So one way that's much better is to do frequency-specific ducking. Let me show you this. So I'm going to use a plugin called C6 by Waves, similar to the C4, but some more parameters, and it has a sidechain feature. So I'm just going to use one band to do this technique. So I'm going to make sure the sidechain input is connected to my vocal duct bus, and then I'm going to turn this band to external, so it listens to the external sidechain key input.
Some property to give me a monopoly. Man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Why do people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me?
Now, what's so amazing about this technique is you can find where there's the most clashing frequencies between your vocal and instrumental and just duck that portion. Now, obviously, you could just make a cut with an EQ, but why this technique is so powerful is that it's musical and dynamic, meaning that when the vocal stops, the music gets to breathe and come back to life. With an EQ, it would be cut forever. So to me, this technique is incredibly powerful. One plugin I'd like to highlight here is called Track Spacer by Waves Factory. This plugin is designed for this exact purpose, meaning that it's going to take the inverse frequency of the vocal and lay it on top of the music. Let me demonstrate.
Man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Why do people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me. Trying to get some property to give me a monopoly. Man, there ain't nobody stopping me. Why do people watching me? Why they wanna be?
I feel so much more presence in the vocals on top of the music. Track Spacer is one of my favorite plugins for this use, and I absolutely recommend you get it. Now let's talk about another advanced technique known as parallel compression. Parallel compression, also known as New York compression, is a dynamic range compression technique used in sound recording and mixing. Parallel compression is a form of upward compression. It's achieved by mixing an unprocessed dry or lightly compressed signal with a heavily compressed version of the same signal. And this adds punch and clarity and makes the sound feel much more explosive. So check this out. All right, so now I'm going to show you parallel compression, and I'm going to do this with the entire mix. So I have my vocals and my music summed to this aux right here. On the send here, I'm going to make a new track and call it PC for parallel compression. I'm going to make a stereo aux. Option click here to shoot out the level. And then I'm going to turn the volume fader all the way down because I don't want to hear this just yet. I'm going to use the Bomb Factory 76 for this. It is a stock Pro Tools plugin, but it actually sounds amazing as well. I'm going to shift click on this so all buttons in. I'm going to make it sound more explosive. And then I'm going to compress this signal incredibly aggressive. I'm going to pin the needle.
This is my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up.
So you can see I'm smashing the needle on this. And now what I'm going to do is bring up the volume fader and blend this in just enough to add this explosive, powerful sound that's going to enhance the whole entire mix. Check this out.
This is my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man. There ain't nobody stopping me. Why do people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they
Absolutely incredible. I hear this clarity, this punch. The whole entire mix just seems to pop out. And let me show you what that sounds like.
This is my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man. There ain't nobody.
So the sound you're hearing is just the parallel compression. Now I use this technique very, very often because I do a lot of music with pop and hip hop. So I tend to use this on every mix, to be honest. But I'm not saying that you should. There's obviously genres like jazz or classical where you may not want to do this, but if you dial it in just right, it could even work. You never know. Just remember though, make sure that this level is very subtle and it's not making your mix louder because loudness will always fool you. So you have to add just the right amount to make sure you're not just turning up the volume of your mix. And do remember, you can use this on individual sounds or your whole entire mix. It's just a very powerful technique. And if you need something to cut through the mix more or have more presence and power, parallel compression is an excellent way to do so. All right, here's another plugin I definitely want to highlight. This is Sooe 2. This is a dynamic resonance suppressor. This is like a dynamic tool, but it's very intelligent as well. So what it's going to do is dynamically react to all the harsh resonances in your signal. It's absolutely one of the most powerful plugins and the ultimate tool to solve harshness. Sooe 2 is a dynamic resonance suppressor. It identifies problematic resonances on the fly and applies matching reduction automatically. This results in a smoother, more balanced sound and saves you from having to notch out frequencies by hand. So how it works is pretty simple. When you boost a band, you're telling Sooe to focus on that area more. If you cut a band, you're telling Sooe to not focus on that area as much. We have a soft mode and a hard mode. Soft mode is more transparent, easier to adjust, and more suited to dynamic material. Hard mode is more adjustable, can be pushed harder, and reacts more to the level of the material. The depth just changes how much processing is applied. Higher value results in bigger cuts.
Listen, my philosophy. Like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get him in.
You can adjust how sharp the individual notches are, similar to the Q on an EQ. Higher values make the notches narrower, but may introduce more artifacts.
Listen, my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese. Like I won a lottery.
You can adjust how selective the process is. Less selectivity results in more overall tone shaping, more effective for noisy sibilants, for example. More selectivity focuses the processing on the narrower peaks.
Listen, my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese. Like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no.
Then we have some standard controls, attack, release. You can feed it a sidechain input like we just talked about, so you could use Sooe to duck your mix with the vocals. Change the balance between the dry and the process signal. I use this very often. You have a trim knob. Delta will allow you to hear the difference between the wet and dry signals, i.e. what has changed.
Listen, my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese. Like
So that's showing you what you're reducing. And that's the basic gist of it. And most of the time I can just put it on the default setting and put the mix down to 50.
Listen, my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese. Like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get him in. There ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why do people watching me?
And you can feel the vocals sound smoother and a little bit less harsh. So Sooe 2 is the ultimate tool for dealing with harshness. You can do this with EQ or dynamic EQ, but Sooe to me is just so much easier and gets the job done. All right, so for the last part of the video, I want to talk about gates. A noise gate is an audio processor that works to eliminate sounds below a given threshold in a recording. Noise gates are similar to compressors in that they both reduce the volume of audio. However, compressors work on audio signals that pass over the given threshold, whereas noise gates reduce signals that are under the given threshold. Noise gates work very similar to how a fence gate would work. When you set the volume threshold of a noise gate, the gate will open if an audio signal passes the threshold, allowing the audio to come through the gate. The gate will close whenever the audio ducks below the threshold, diminishing the amount of the signal that is allowed to come through. The amount of volume reduction a noise gate performs on your audio is dependent on the ratio you set. The higher the ratio, the more the gate will apply volume reduction to your signal once it passes below the threshold. The rate at which the gate opens can be modified by the attack control, and the rate at which it closes can be modified by the release control. Some noise gates offer a hold control, which allows you to set the time it takes to begin closing the gate after your signal dips below the threshold. Noise gates can be very useful for removing unwanted background noises from your recordings. You can add a noise gate to an electric guitar to help cut down the amount of amplifier buzz during the gaps between notes played. When applied to a vocal, they can help tame the breathiness and cut out any room reverb or ambient noise between phrases. And they can also be used for trimming transients. Since noise gates can be used to shape the volume dynamics of a recording, you can use them to trim any transients that may fall below your set threshold. For example, one of my favorite uses for a noise gate is to simplify and strip down my drum loops. So you can make your drums sound more punchy and aggressive if you gate them hard. Now you can see there can be a lot of controls on a gate plugin, but I like to keep it simple, and this is one of my favorite ones in the whole entire world. So this is the RVox by Waves, an amazing compressor, but one of my favorite uses for it is the gate. So it's very simple to use, where you set the threshold and then any audio below this will be turned down.
Get a lot of cheese, like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get him in. Say ain't nobody stopping me. Trying to get some property, then give me a monopoly.
And as you can see, when the vocal got quiet and it fell below the threshold, the gate closed up. Now there's one other side note I want to add to gates, where there is downward expanders. This device is very similar to the gate. The only major difference is that instead of muting the signal once it falls below the threshold, the expander still lets some of the signal through, but at a lower level, resulting in a signal of lower volume. Because of lowering the volume at these quieter levels, expansion basically creates a wider dynamic range between the quieter parts of the signal and the loudest part. Instead of squashing the dynamic range like a compressor, it expands the dynamic range instead. I think of it like an upside down compressor. So meaning that a gate is much more aggressive and a downward expander is much more gradual. So as you can see, when you look at this signal,
Say ain't nobody stopping me, trying to get some property to give me a monopoly.
the vocal is below the gate, but it's not being muted entirely. It's just being turned down in volume. So for me, I much more prefer this because it's a lot more foolproof and it's a much more smoother result. That's why the RVox gate for me is one of my absolute favorites.
Say ain't nobody stopping me, trying to get some property to give me a monopoly.
So I'll use this on all my vocals because of this gate setting. Now, this isn't a compressor, but I do want to mention this plugin because it is very useful. This is called Vocal Rider by Waves. Basically, it hears an incoming signal and adjusts it to stay inside a user set dB range. All you need to do is set the target range of the vocal level in relation to the rest of the mix. Then Vocal Rider compensates for anything outside the target, raising or lowering the vocal gain. The biggest thing is that, unlike compression, this plugin won't color the track. Since it's a fader, Vocal Rider sits naturally at the end of your chain or the beginning. Using this plugin creates an automated, fast way to clean up a vocal track, especially if the performer doesn't have great mic technique. The alternative is manually leveling everything out with either clip gain or written automation. And this does take a lot of time, so Vocal Rider for me is a lifesaver. I'll show you very quick how to use it.
This is my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man. There ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna be? Why they wanna be me? I said ain't nobody stopping me. Trying to get some property to give me a monopoly. Like, this is my philosophy. Get a lot of cheese like I won a lottery. Keep it up, no apology. Gotta go and get it, man. There ain't nobody stopping me. Like, why these people watching me? Why they wanna?
So I'll usually use this first after my pitch correction to lighten the workload on my compressors. You can also feed the sidechain input with the music and have it pay attention to the music. Not to mention, it can also write volume automation that you can update later. So the biggest thing with this plugin is you gotta make sure it's not jerking the vocal too much and it's not noticeable. But if you get the settings just right, it can be a very clean, transparent sound that just evens the performance of your vocals. So though it's not a compressor, I still love to use this with my compressors to lighten the workload for them. So there's many compressors out there, but essentially everything in this video should be all you need to get started. Have a wonderful day, everybody.